Dear participants to this lunch webinar, a very warm welcome. As president of the European Law Institute, it is a great pleasure and my privilege to welcome you all to this webinar entitled Repair and Reuse Towards a Circular Economy. As you know, the European Law Institute runs different types of projects, as you can see from its website, www.europeanlawinstitute.eu. One of our three pillars is dedicated to sustainable life and society. Under this umbrella, we run several projects, among which one on climate justice. We have just approved one on guidance on company capital and financial accounting for corporate sustainability, and are in the process to approve another one on ecocide. Next to these projects, the European Law Institute takes also the opportunity to prepare responses to public consultations, in particular those of the European Commission, when they are in our field of research. You can find those responses on our website under projects and publications in the page dedicated to so-called other initiatives. There you will find the response of the European Law Institute to the European Commission's public consultation on sustainable consumption of goods, promoting repair and reuse. The ELI response was approved by the ELI Council and filed on 5th April 2022. The author of the response is Professor Susanne Augenhofer, a member of our ELI Council and the chair of the ELI Austrian Hub. She's with us today and will give some indications on the content of our response, but more importantly, about what the ELI expect the Commission should do in this regard. Indeed, more than a year has elapsed since the public consultation was launched, and we are thrilled to hear whether we get a move forward and what the result might be. It is indeed not just a question of repair and reuse, but really what we expect from the circular economy. A recent policy brief published by the German Consumer Councils entitled Right to Repair triggered our interest. We thought that this would be an excellent moment to discuss and compare the views of these two policy briefs, so to say. The German policy brief has been drafted by Professor Hans Miklitz, an ELI member and well-known scholar in the field of consumer law, as well as Peter Kenning, Christa Liedtke, Victor Mennert, and Luisa Specht-Riechmeier. We do not have everyone with us on the panel today, but at least Professor Miklitz and Victor Mennert. I will not present our fantastic panel of speakers right now, but do it when we proceed. Before we begin, let me therefore remind you that the chat function has been disabled so that all your questions can be posed to our panelists through the Q&A function. You find it normally on the bottom of your screen. Do not wait until the end to pose your question. You can do it during the presentations and of course at the end as well. Our first presentation is a presentation by Professor Susanne Augenhofer. She's a full professor. She has been a full professor of law at the University of Innsbruck since January 2020. She was previously a professor of law at Humboldt University in Berlin, as well as at the University of Erfurt, all in Germany. She has an impressive resume, including an LLM from Yale and some important research positions around the world. She currently serves as a member of the Council of the European Law Institute and is also an advisor to the European Parliament and the European Commission on various issues regarding European fair trading as well as consumer law. So I will not take more of your time, but just hand over to Susanne Augenhofer so that she can briefly present the most important features of ELI's response to this public consultation.
Thank you, dear President, for having me and for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my slides. which you should be able to see now. And we agreed beforehand that I will do just a very quick presentation because we hope that some of you will have read our response, and also because we think it's really crucial at this time that we have a proper discussion and that we save most of our time for the discussion. And as the President mentioned, we are thrilled to hear from Mr. Steinmeier what the Commission has in mind. So I feel very, I was very happy when I was asked by the President and the ELI last year to draft the response by the ELI to the consultation of the Commission. Why? Because the topic, how we have to say, how we can save our environment, and that need that we must save our environment is not new. If you read this statement on the slide, you might wonder it's from last year or from when the Commission presented the Green Deal. But indeed, it's from 1971, and it's from Nixon, from the State of the Union in January 2022. So quite some time ago. And I will stick to some key features of the consultation and our response. So we focused on the response paper on the right to repair. And obviously, the consultation also asked if actions should be taken on a European level or on a national level. That's maybe something where Professor Mikletz and I disagree, and we will hear more about his paper and the paper just published by him and his colleagues after my presentation. And so we focused on the right to repair and the amendments to the Sale of Goods Directive. So when I drafted the response last April, I was under the impression this was the information given by the European Commission that we would see the adoption of an adapted directive of sale of goods in the third quarter of 2022. But now we are in 2023 and we are still waiting for the new directive. So again, I'm really, really thrilled that Mr. Steinmeier is here today with us and hopefully can present some news. While the consultation and hence also the response paper focuses on the right to repair, I think it's really, really crucial to point out that the right to repair cannot be seen isolated, but must be seen in a bigger picture. And this bigger picture includes greenwashing, which I think if you look at the jurisprudence in different member states over the last 2 years, has become more and more important. There are there's a lot of case law already showing that companies use greenwashing to trigger decisions by consumers to buy goods which are at the end not green at all. Also, eco-design legislation, of course, has to be seen together with the right to repair. Antitrust agreements, some member states like Austria have already adopted the antitrust codes with regard to the Green Deal. And on the European level, as far as I know, also the Commission thinks in this direction, and then there's premature psychological obsolescence. And so it's very short-handed to just think about the right to repair. Also, when we submitted, as the President has mentioned, the response in early April 2022, the consultation was published before the proposal for the regulation for eco-design requirements was published. So the response paper does not really focus on this, but just on the right to repair and the consultation. With regard to the proposal for a directive to empower consumers for the green transition through better protection against unfair practices, well, I just have pointed out that I think greenwashing is really important, and we should not forget about the impact greenwashing has on the environment and the decisions by consumers. I'm not convinced that the proposal is a good way to go forward. Why? We have just amended, or the European Commission has just amended the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive through the Omnibus Directive. And I don't think it's a good idea to amend the annex of the UCPD every time there are new commercial practices to be observed. I think the European Commission should trust the courts in member states that they are able and willing to apply the general clauses and the general clause for unfair commercial practices in a way which can encompass greenwashing. So what was the consultation proposing or asking our feedback upon? The right to repair itself, I think, is a term which constitutes some greenwashing, because it's not a right given to the consumers. It's rather that something is taken away from consumers. We all know that under the current version of the directive on the sale of goods, the consumer has the choice between repair and replacement. And the idea presented in the consultation, repair would be the primary remedy. So it's not that the consumer gets something, as the title right to repair suggests, but it's rather that something is taken away for the greater good of the environment and accomplishing the Green Deal, which I think would only be justified if indeed repair as a primary remedy can achieve a better environment for consumers and everybody else. Other accompanying proposals are restarting the legal guarantee period after repair, longer legal guarantee periods also to justify that repair is the primary remedy. And as you see on the slide, has been also suggested by the consultation that there are different guarantee periods for new and second-hand goods and refurbished goods. So there's also differentiation between second-hand goods and refurbished goods. Refurbished goods being goods which have been used, then taken back by the seller, checked whether or not they're still fit for purpose, and then brought back to the marketplace, while second-hand goods are goods used by the consumers and then sold on by consumers, not the seller. Replacement of defective products by refurbished goods, and then voluntary business commitments, codes of conduct by companies. So in the response paper, and obviously I cannot go here in every detail, I'm probably already using too much of your time. So obviously, repair as a primary remedy can increase longevity of a product, but it restricts the consumer's free choice for a remedy according to their preferences. So obviously, the current version of the directive would have to be changed, because right now there's such choice for a remedy by the consumer. I also would like to point out that sustainability also encompasses social sustainability. And if there is a right to repair, so repair is the only primary remedy for consumers, I think it's safe to assume that products will become more expensive. So certain consumer groups will not be any longer able to buy certain goods. And I think this is a problem which cannot be neglected. Also, with regard to restarting the legal guarantee period after repair, so this would help consumers to overcome the loss of replacement as another remedy. But again, we have to figure in the costs of such longer guarantees. And we can think, or I think it would maybe be a better solution to to nudge businesses to offer consumers the restart of a legal guarantee after repair at a premium. And indeed, there are some companies, especially in the US and in the clothing industry, which already offer such longer guarantee periods. And such longer guarantee periods are offered by the companies that have in mind, regardless of any repair. So they advertise their clothes as being especially long living and durable. Again, of course, we have to be careful that such claims are not part of greenwashing. So because I have to come to an end with my presentation and save my other thoughts for discussion, I would just point out two more things which I think we should discuss later on. So who should be obliged to repair products? Should it be the manufacturer? Who would be the easiest cost avoiders or cheapest cost avoider, and hence I think should be the one, or the seller, which might not be able to repair the good himself, but has the opportunity and the means to sending the defective product back to the manufacturer or the consumer and third party. And I would like to point out the decision which was made in the US 3 weeks ago, where a manufacturer of goods in agriculture, John Deere, was forced to publish the repair insights for his products, so that also consumers, which are not necessarily consumers in the sense of European consumer law, but the buyers and third parties can repair the bought goods themselves. So here in the paper, I have a strong focus on the manufacturer, but also enabling consumers and third parties to being able to repair the goods. And then some additional suggestions, publication of repair cards, that's what I just mentioned, then and must be technically possible. Here we also again have an overlap with antitrust law, and then I think it's also crucial to inform consumers about the environmental impact of product and its durability. Maybe this is something Hans will tell us more about. There's also some clash what consumers want to do for the environment and what they really do. They say they're focused on the environment, but then they want to have a new smartphone every year or every second year, and they want to have new clothes every year. And to President, the very last point, I think we should also keep in mind when amending the sales directive that if there's a right to repair and the consumer has to send in the goods and for repair, that in the meantime the consumer gets a replacement good which he or she can use. And I would like to use an example which I always use when I talk about this topic, because it's I think everybody can imagine it, what's going to happen if your washing machine breaks down, you have to send it in and you don't have a washing machine for 3 weeks. And I think everybody can now see before his or her eyes the bill of clothes which need to be washed within 3 weeks. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, dear Susanne, for this presentation. One can see, of course, that it is always a matter of balancing different factors, the environmental factor, the freedom of choice, the cost avoidance aspect, and also how to take into account cost, how to count, so to say, the factor as you mentioned as well. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion, which will certainly be interesting. Now I have the pleasure to present very shortly the two next speakers. Hans Wolfgang Miklitz. Professor Miklitz has, of course, an impressive career, and he's a well-respected professor of European law and particularly of consumer law around the world. And he's currently professor for economic law at the European University Institute in Florence. His main field of activities is not only European private and consumer law, but also private law and theory, which is sometimes important to let things move forward. And he's joined today on the panel by Victor Mennert. Victor Mennert is a research assistant at the chair of civil law, information law, and data law at the University of Bonn by Professor Specht Riemenschneider. He writes his dissertation on the right to repair and is also one of the co-author of the policy brief Right to Repair that we are discussing also today. So it's really my great pleasure to hand over to both of you, to Hans and to Victor. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I think this is really a very important topic in the sense that I see it as a kind of a break-even point in which direction we are going. And in the Advisory Board of Consumer Affairs, we have chosen this seemingly minor issue to look exactly what you said, Pascal, in the beginning, into the bigger picture, into the circular economy. And the strength of the Advisory Board is its interdisciplinary composition. So that means in the long version that is available online, we do not have only legal analysis, but an economic and a sociological analysis. So how does business look into these issues of repairability of products and what does it imply? But also, what about the consumers? To what extent are they prepared to use the right to repair? I think Susanne gave an example of the difficulties. However, today we really focus on the legal side, and in order not to make it easier for the audience, I immediately hand over to Victor, and I leave it then for the discussion. There is certainly time for me to intervene later. Thank you. Victor, please.
Thank you, Pascal and Hans. I will try to share my screen with you, and I hope you can see it now. So as Professor Augenhofer already made us aware of the ongoing initiatives concerning the right to repair, I will limit myself to a quick overview at this point so we can move on to the key findings of our policy brief and the questions that are still to be discussed. So what has happened so far? The starting point is changes in environmental law and consumer law. Various initiatives have committed themselves to the Green Deal. We have the planned eco-design regulation, extending the eco-design approach to all physical goods and aiming to set requirements for energy and resource efficiency. We have amendments of the Consumer Rights Directive and the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, and of course, what we are especially discussing today, the revision of the Sale of Goods Directive to ensure that consumers can also actively demand a repair. The question we want to raise today is how do these initiatives relate to each other and how are they coordinated? So far, the references within the initiatives going back to the Green Deal are limited to merely pointing to existing synergies, but there is no explicit linkage yet. However, all those legal instruments cannot develop their full potential if they only coexist and do not explicitly work together. Why is that? Because the individual instruments have weaknesses that reduce their effectiveness. At the same time, it would be possible to compensate for even these weaknesses. For instance, already in 2016, the Commission identified in its eco-design work program that up to 25% of products do not meet eco-design requirements and that more needs to be done to reduce the number of non-compliant products on the EU market. Even with the new eco-design regulation, market surveillance remains the responsibility of member states. However, the authorities often lack the resources and competence to carry out comprehensive controls. With the extension of the eco-design approach to all physical goods and thus a higher number of product-specific regulation, this problem is likely to become even more severe. Consumer law could help here by enforcing eco-design standards, also individually or collectively through private law. Conversely, the instrument of market surveillance could address known weaknesses from private enforcement. Consumers often do not have the same investigation possibilities and access to information as market surveillance authorities. So therefore, in our policy brief, we give two central recommendations. First, a holistic perspective on the right to repair must be adopted. It is important to link the existing legal instruments in a meaningful way. This concerns, on the one hand, the right to repair within the legal guarantee, as we already heard. In the Sale of Goods Directive, it should be made explicitly clear that compliance with eco-design standards is necessary for objective conformity with the contract. Article 7 of the Sale of Goods Directive makes it clear that technical standards can be used to determine if a good is fit for the purposes for which goods of the same type would normally be used. Recital 32 of the Sale of Goods Directive states that the objectives of the directive should complement product-specific legislation with regard to sustainability. Thus, for example, a good would not meet the objective requirements if it is not repairable by design. This approach could also be applied to the updating obligations. So if an eco-design regulation provides for an obligation to update software for 5 years, the consumer should be able to expect this period as a minimum within the contract. The reference to eco-design standards is already possible now, but it must be systematically anchored in the entire Sales of Goods Directive. So further adjustment must be made, as we already heard, to make the Sale of Goods Directive eco-design friendly, in particular, the limitation periods of the duration of the reversal of the burden of proof. So they must be adjusted accordingly. A central question is also against whom a repair claim should be directed. The Sale of Goods Directive limits itself to claims against the seller, which has also been criticized against the background of increasingly complex relationships in digital economy. Also, in the context of the right to repair, the seller is often not the right contact, because he's not in a position to provide the spare parts or carry out the repair by himself. This becomes even more obvious when one looks at the updating obligations. The seller is almost never in the position to provide software updates themselves. So in the end, the manufacturer seems to be the cheapest cost avoider, so why shouldn't he be liable? In the end, this is not a new concept. Models exist, such as the French Action Directe. A holistic approach to creating a repair culture and a right to repair also requires thinking about the right to repair outside the legal guarantee. In its impact assessment, the Commission therefore proposes to introduce a separate right to repair outside the legal guarantee, free of charge or at reasonable prices. But why should the manufacturer, for example, be obliged to carry out a repair free of charge if the consumer has damaged his device himself? Even if he's supposed to do it at reasonable prices, this brings us close to price regulation, which is a difficult area from a legal point of view. However, there might be even a simpler solution. Instead of even more obligations for manufacturers and sellers, competitors and independent businesses could be allowed to offer their products and services on the spare parts and repair market. This would stimulate price competition and increase the availability of repair. This would require consideration for the intellectual property of the manufacturer, so that adjustments may also be necessary here. For example, one could think of the repair clause in the Design Directive, which allows the production and distribution of protected spare parts under certain conditions. With regard to electronic devices and smart products, access to the generated data is also becoming increasingly important for repair. The Data Act is concerned with granting users and third parties access to generated data, among other things, to enable maintenance and repair. So there are also other legal rules that may need to be brought into line with the eco-design approach. What we've seen is that right to repair requires the adaptation of many different legal rules, and some of them have so far not been systematically designed to promote sustainable consumption at all. There are therefore uncertainties as to how the ecological transition in law can succeed. It is unlikely to work straight away, rather it is something like a long-term task. There should be therefore regulatory leeway for member states so as to not stand in the way of innovative legal solutions. Further, full harmonization would lead to something like a core set of rules whose effectiveness can hardly be estimated in advance. There should be opening clauses that allow member states to try out regulations and report back to the Commission. After a few years, these results can then be evaluated and an experience-based legislative approach can be chosen. That brings me to the end. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you for this insightful perspective. And I'm sure I can see already some questions in the chat, in the Q&A function that will lead us to dig further. But before doing so, of course, as it appears from both presentations, there are at the core also some political choices and some understanding of the need of the consumers. That's why we have today on our panel also Patricia Gauthier, who is a senior legal officer at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. She holds the position of the team leader of BEUC Consumer Rights Team, in charge of the entire consumer law acquis, including the pending and upcoming legislative files on consumer law in the green transition. So in a way, this is a voice of the consumers, though I don't want her to monopolize that voice, but at least she comes on that panel in that position. She holds an LLM in European law from the University of Luxembourg and a master in laws from the University of Gdańsk in Poland. And I'm happy now to give her the floor. Patricia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pascal. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for this invitation. Very interesting webinar and very timely now in perspective of the upcoming initiatives. Maybe first to introduce a bit BEUC. We are the consumer voice and we represent consumer organizations from across Europe towards European institutions and follow all the policy developments related to consumer law and consumer protection. For the topic of today's webinar, so the right to repair, if we go to the next slide, I wanted to start with a little clarification. What do we understand under the right to repair? Because the upcoming proposal, which is commonly known or called proposal on the right to repair, it's focusing on the contract law. But the objective of the right to repair and this concept goes way beyond the contract law. I think what we are understanding under this term is how to make products more durable and repairable, and how to foster a true culture of repair in Europe to eliminate also the barriers to repair that the consumers are facing, which are, according to our members' research, often linked to the price of repair or the inconvenience of repair. That has been mentioned also by Susanna in her earlier intervention. That's why the introduction of the right to repair requires changes in many different policy fields. So not only consumer law, but also product policy legislation, IP legislation, and the provisions related to consumer information. So the upcoming proposal, we consider it only one piece of this bigger right to repair puzzle. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to introduce a bit here the consumer law perspective and a bit of our expectations also towards the upcoming initiatives. We consider the last revision of the Sales of Goods Directive, unfortunately, a lost opportunity from the sustainability perspective. It was focused very much on digital issues, but on sustainability angles, it was not ambitious enough in our view. Even though there were some regulatory choices left to the member states, only a handful of countries have decided to actually go beyond the minimum when transposing the directive. But now there is this new opportunity that has emerged with the much stronger political priorities towards sustainability that has been expressed very clearly by the European Commission in its strategic documents, such as the European Green Deal or the new consumer agenda. And that's why we think maybe now it's time to take more ambitious measures and to make sure that the reform that will come really makes tangible changes for consumers and introduces a real right to repair. We have also several initiatives in this area that are going on in parallel. The eco-design revision, but also the proposal on empowering consumers for the green transition. And that is also an opportunity to take a more holistic view and to reflect upon the right to repair from different angles. And like has been mentioned in the previous presentation, currently the link between the consumer sales law and the product policy legislation is missing, which is really unfortunate because those different instruments are working towards the same goal, making products more repairable and durable, but currently they don't work together, but rather in silos, and that should also be changed. If we move to the next slide, please. I wanted to start to present to you briefly BEUC's recommendations towards the upcoming proposal. So first of all, what we see as a very important element of the right to repair is to expand the legal guarantee periods to make sure consumers can access repair for much longer than the current 2 years, especially that the minimum guarantee period is not appropriate for many types of more durable goods, such as some types of electronics or white goods. And that's why we think the reform should focus on this type of products. So to keep the general guarantee periods for all kinds of goods as it is, but to expand it for those goods that are typically more durable and should last longer. And for that, what we have suggested is to define those periods in the eco-design implementing measures and make them more product specific, so that we would have different guarantee periods for different types of goods, which would also reflect better the expected lifespan. Next slide, please. And that change, of course, should be combined with additional elements to be really effective. So it has been mentioned before, the further extension of the reversal of burden of proof is key in practical terms. That is what allows consumers to actually enforce the legal guarantee right. So ideally, it should be aligned with the legal guarantee periods. The introduction of the director-producer liability is long overdue as well. We have been discussing it for years now in the EU, and we really see the need of making producers also liable for non-conformity of products. They are the ones that have impact on the design of products, and if we want to create an incentive for them to produce goods of a better quality that will last longer, such direct liability could be key. In terms of changes to the hierarchy of remedies that the Commission is considering, BEUC is not supporting the idea of making the repair the only primary remedy. We think repair is not the solution to all kinds of problems and all types of non-conformity. Not all goods can be repaired. Instead, we do understand that some changes might be needed. What we think the Commission should focus on is rather to encouraging repair within the hierarchy of remedies. So we have suggested in our response to the public consultation, for example, some changes to the proportionality test that could also take into account the environmental consideration, or excluding replacements in cases of minor defects. That could also be a solution to seek. And that should be also combined with some measures that could limit the inconvenience of repair. So here, the obligation to provide the temporary replacement product that has been mentioned before is also one of our points that we have raised, but also limiting the type of repair. So making a fixed limit of, we have proposed 15 days for repairs of products. Another important element to expand the durability of connected goods, most importantly, is the period during which the software updates are being provided. And currently, this period is often not long enough, which means that consumers need to discard perfectly well-functioning products just because the updates are not available anymore. And ideally, we think they should be provided for the entire expected lifespan of products. Next slide, please. The changes to the Sales of Goods Directive should go hand in hand with better information to consumers. Consumers are really interested now to buy products that are more repairable and more durable, that impacts their transactional decisions. That's why BEUC is supporting the idea of an EU-wide repair index that is currently being discussed in the European Union. But also in terms of information on durability, we have made a suggestion for an introduction of a guaranteed lifespan label. And what we understand under this is that would be a label that will be displaying to consumers for how long the products are covered by the guarantee. And under that, we mean as a minimum what is provided by laws and the mandatory legal guarantee period, which would be always displayed to consumers. And then if producers would be willing to compete on the market by offering products that are more durable, the information, the number displayed to consumers could be higher. But that would then mean that the producer on a voluntary basis expanded the legal guarantee period. So we see this not under the commercial guarantee, but rather under the legal guarantee, so that the same conditions continue to apply, but just for a longer period under this voluntary expansion. Next slide, please. And maybe to quickly conclude, what I wanted to say is now it's the right moment to take ambitious measures. It's not only the climate crisis demand, but also the fact that consumers could save a lot by buying products that last longer and don't need to be replaced too often. We should take the stronger focus on specific product categories where the impact will be higher, so electronics or white goods, for instance. We need to take a coherent approach under the EU law and consider the broad policy objectives, make sure that different instruments work together and are coherent, create the link between the consumer law and product policy legislation, and lastly, make sure that there are no trade-offs between the legal guarantee rights and the new right to repair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia Gauthier, for this very insightful presentation, and I'm sure it gives even more thoughts, food for thought. Before going to the discussion, let's have now a kind of political perspective with Malte Galle. He's the youngest German member of the European Parliament. He studied economics and philosophy and focused on economic policy mechanism to combat the climate crisis, and on instrument for fair trade and sustainable management of planetary resources. And prior to joining the European Parliament, he has been campaigning for international aid organizations such as Amnesty International, UN Refugee Agency, or the WWF. And I think this matter of the right to repair will come to the EU Parliament very soon, and therefore we are thrilled to hear what Malte Galle has to say to us. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. I will talk about the right to repair in the European Parliament, then also a bit about our green position on this, and then I will also look into the files that were already discussed right now. So let's start also with the big picture. So in 2019, before the European elections and before the Commission started its program, there were thousands of people going to the streets and demanding really urgent and fast climate action. And I think this is just the very best proof for our working democracy, that so many people can basically form the Commission program, because the European Green Deal that is aiming at making our continent the very first carbon neutral continent in 2050. This is, I think we can thank the civil society and everybody who engaged in this topic. And I think, one really crucial part in reaching our climate targets and protecting our climate and our nature so that the future generations can still live on this planet is if we really reduce our absolute resource use. And one crucial part in this is indeed the right to repair campaign in general. So basically how we also really stick to our waste hierarchy. How do we create less waste? You know, we got the concept of waste hierarchy in Europe. So first we want to avoid waste, then we want products that we can reuse, and then we first talk about recycling. So recycling is only the third step in this whole waste hierarchy, and the whole right to repair idea belongs in the second step, so the reuse of products. And so yeah, this is just crucial for all of us to reach these targets, I think. The European Parliament on the right to repair has no official position yet, since we're still waiting for the Commission proposal that will amend the Sales of Goods Directive, as it was mentioned already. But we had initiative reports. We had our own initiative report on this, where we, for example, demanded that, for example, we want a joint manufacturer-seller liability mechanism in the event of a non-conformity for products. And of course, we also demand for the amendment of the Sales of Goods Directive. Another thing is what we also asked for was the extension of the legal guarantee, as it was mentioned also quite often already. And also that we reach the full harmonization in the single market of the legal guarantee. One part that we are working on already right now, as it was mentioned, the right to repair is not only one file, but it's many directives where we have to turn the shifts around. Is what we are working on already is that we are demanding a repair score. I was the shadow for the opinion to the empowering consumers in the green transition file, and there we ask the sellers actually to apply repair scores, and also to information about the durability of products. And in general, I think that the whole idea of giving back the choice to the people is basically one part in a bigger fight against, yeah, basically the monopoly of big companies that shifted away from systems how we had it already. For example, if we take computers, where you could just replace some spare parts, where products were more modular, that we can go back to this kind of systems through amending these different kinds of directives. To our position from the Greens EFA group on the whole idea of right to repair, for us, of course, it's really important to first focus on the design. And of course, this is a huge, it's a huge influence on companies and how they design their products. And the second idea is how we get companies to repair their products. Therefore, we want really binding targets until 2030 for a significant reduction in material use, and the right to repair is a really crucial part in this. Then the whole eco-design regulation, where we basically give the design requirements for products, is the main part where we cover the design part, of course, where is also, for example, linked the product passport. And I think this is also a huge opportunity. The digital product passport, which will be applied to every product that comes to the market soon, should have like the informations about repairability and where to get the spare parts, also the information to spare parts and stuff like this. And also carry the information on repairability and durability. And we are working on this at the moment in the European Parliament. We'll come to a parliament position quite soon, but I think this looks really good so far. Nevertheless, the file that really carries the title right to repair got postponed and postponed and postponed again. So yeah, we are really upset about this process from the European Commission, that they did not deliver in time, because like this, of course, for us in the parliament, it's really hard to have a really good and ambitious the amendment of the sales of good directive then in the end. But yeah, we are hoping that we will get the file in March. So as I said in the beginning, right to repair is not only one file, but it's many. It's the eco-design regulation, it's the empowering consumers file, which is an amendment to the unfair commercial practices directive and the consumer rights directive, and of course it's the right to repair initiative. That is still to come. The first ones we are working on already, and the last one we're expecting. And yeah, happy to go into discussion, and also happy to hear all your ideas, and also stay in contact about this later on this year when we go more into detail with the files. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mate. Thank you very much for this presentation. Also for this idea of the 3R: reduce, reuse, and retreat waste. And we saw a right to R, right to repair. But I think that Dirk Staudenmayer might have a right to reply to your criticism about what happens and whether this file comes in front of the parliament. And that's why I will give him the floor. As you know, Dirk Staudenmayer is the head of unit for contract law of the DG Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. So that person that we really want on the panel to answer some of the questions and take also benefit of all these ideas. He's also a teacher as an honorary professor at the law faculty of the University of Münster. And as you know, he has published widely, in particular in the area of European contract, consumer, and IT law. And also before being at the DG Just, he was at the DG Health and Consumers, which makes him also really at the crossroads of some of the topics we are discussing together today. And so I give the floor to Dirk Staudenmayer. Dirk, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for your kind words of introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. As we are according to our internal agenda already at the time when the Q&A session should start, I'll try to be brief. But let me perhaps say a few things reacting to the points which have been raised. The first one is state of play and the timing, and we are being late, etc. So that indeed is absolutely correct. We are late. The Commission had initially foreseen an adoption of this proposal in autumn. That did not take place because we received a negative opinion by the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. The Regulatory Scrutiny Board is a Commission internal body, which in the context of the better regulation process looks at the quality of impact assessments. And the Regulatory Scrutiny Board gave us a number of guidance and advice to clarify some aspects of the initial version of the impact assessment, including, and that has been mentioned several times in the discussions, the connections with related Commission initiatives. Now, the fact that the Regulatory Scrutiny Board delivered a negative opinion on this first draft of the impact assessment report is nothing unusual. This is totally normal part of the better regulation process. I had this in several files, and I've seen it in several other files, quite a high number of several other files in the last years. It's a totally normal part of the process, and that's how we have taken it, and that's what we have done. So we have improved indeed the impact assessment, has submitted a revised version in December, and I'm happy to say that just yesterday we received a positive opinion of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board on the second version, which we have put forward. Obviously, there are still a number of guidance and helpful advice how we can improve the report, which we will of course do before submitting this to the college, and then the college can take in the light of an improved impact assessment, a political decision what to do. So far, so normal, part of our better regulation process, an important foundation of our work, which the Commission sticks to and holds very high. Now, we have seen a lot of interest, not only in the European Parliament, but among other stakeholders to this proposal. And that is why the Commission committed in the Commission Work Programme 2023 that a new proposal will come forward in the first months of 2023. And indeed, that is the case. We're sticking to this commitment too. And the adoption of this proposal is scheduled, if everything was going to plan, on the 22nd of March of this year. So in a little bit less than 2 months, we will come forward with the proposal. So that's the first point which I wanted to mention, that is the state of play. Now, a bit delayed, but we're still on track with the, in a nutshell, with the modified commitment of the Commission. Second point I wanted to mention is the holistic approach, which has been mentioned several times. And it has been mentioned several times by several speakers that this proposal is not the right to repair as such, and indeed it isn't. It has to be seen together with a number of Commission proposals, and I would like to stress particularly 2 of them, because the Commission sees this proposal in a package together with the ESPR proposal, which is, which you know, and then the empowering consumers for the green transition proposal. So these 3 proposals together tackle the supply side and the demand side. The big fish in the pond is very clearly the ESPR proposal. And as it has been stressed by several speakers before, among others by Mr. Gallet, because if you compare the impact assessments of the 3 proposals, it's very clear that the by far biggest impact for sustainable consumption and for advantages of the environment will be achieved on the design side, on the supply side, by putting very strict requirements on the manufacturers. And that's what the ESPR proposal does. So the ESPR proposal deals with the supply side and will have a big impact. And then there are 2 proposals on the demand side, and they deal with 2 different aspects. The Empowering Green Consumers proposal deals with information. And basically, the idea is to inform consumers, and that's, after all, the paradigm of consumer law on the EU level since I started to work in consumer law, and that was in the mid-90s, actually. That is to allow the consumers to take a reasonable, and in this case, I add, environmental friendly transaction decision. What kind of decision they take, we are not prescribing to them. So we do not have a paternalistic approach where we tell consumers, you have to do this. We say, look, we give you the information so that you are enabled, empowered to take a transaction decision which is environmental friendly. And that's the purpose of this Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition proposal, which has been adopted on the same day as the ESPR proposal. That was the 30th of March last year. Now, the forthcoming proposal, to be adopted if everything goes according to plan on the 22nd of March, deals with another side of the demand side. And that is what happens if something goes wrong, if a product is defective. And you have to make a fundamental distinction here between the products which turn out to be defective during the legal guarantee framework, which is created by the Sale of Goods Directive, and the products which turn out to be defective outside that legal guarantee framework. Because the problem which we have there is a common problem. It is products are thrown away too easily instead of being repaired. So the purpose of this Commission proposal very clearly is to increase repair and reuse in these 2 dimensions. So within the scope of the Sale of Goods Directive, and therefore within the legal guarantee framework, and outside the scope of the legal guarantee framework created by the Sale of Goods Directive. Because just to remind everybody, many of you will know, but just nevertheless to state it very clearly, the Sale of Goods Directive gives rights to the consumers for remedies in case products are not in conformity with the contract. And that basically means it has to be a defect which was there at the moment of delivery. It has to be manifested within 2 years as a minimum harmonized period. Unfortunately, only minimum harmonized period, unfortunately, in the Sale of Goods Directive. So basically, whenever it is a defect which appears, which was not there at the time of delivery, but is created afterwards, for instance, through the use by the consumer of a product or the misuse of a product, or which appears after 2 years or the longer periods which are which are applicable in certain member states, then the Sale of Goods Directive doesn't help. But what we want to deal is also these products, because there's a quite sizable share of the defects which appear. So that means the proposal will aim at both these dimensions and will, for both, aim to increase repair and reuse of the viable consumer goods, so that they are not thrown away too easily, but are repaired and reused for a longer period instead. And I think I stop it here because I don't want to interfere too much or to cut too much of the time for the Q&A session. And thank you very much for your attention already.
Thank you very much for this very clear statement, also to put everything in the larger picture. And indeed, we have a bit less than half an hour to answer some questions, and I'm sure we will manage to answer some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. I can see that some of them are related, and some of them are related in the sense that people say, I take the first and the second, for instance, they say, okay, one problem is the waste. We have spoken about that. Now, could we not find other models such as having the seller manufacturing, keeping ownership over the good, and in fact changing completely the type of contract and having a lease, whether that would meet some of the problems. And in the same on the same line, someone says, but what about waste that should be brought in instead of having this waste, accumulation of waste? Why should we not ask the producers to get the things back and then do whatever they want, refurbish, repair, resell, and so on and so forth? So maybe because we spoke about this waste issue, which is underlying some of the problems, I don't know who wants to react to that, because it would be, of course, a change of paradigm to some extent. Of course, we do already have these type of structures, but why not? And Hans Miklitz wants to answer, and I'm happy because he said the right of repair is we are at a momentum, so maybe he could elaborate, link to that.
If we take the holistic perspective in the sense that we are not only looking into law, but also into what economic sociology and whatever is saying, then and in particular, if we go into the eco-design and we look into how it works, we will see that the one-size-fits-all approach, that is the basic thinking of lawyers, clashes with the reality. Yeah, so we cannot have the same standards of durability for each and every product. And we cannot maybe also not have the same guarantee period or whatever. So there's a lot that is put into question when we go deeper into the eco-design directive. And the link to the first question is that such a model in a way works already. Think of cars and mobile phones, yeah, where I think many of the cars and mobile phones are not the property of the consumer, and will never be to some extent. So in short, I think we have to draw a distinction there between let's say, the very expensive products that can only be rented in some way or the other, and the consumer pays for the use. And that raises different questions with regard to repair and to reuse and to waste and whatever, recycling. So I think all in all, if we really look into this subject matter from an ecological perspective much deeper, then this wonderful world of lawyers in which we are living is just put into question. And I think this is the moment to discuss it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hans, for this. Malte Galle, please.
Thank you. I also just have a thought on this whole idea of only going towards rental and no ownership basically anymore. I think this is, well, it makes sense in the first thought, but I think also many consumers, they want this kind of ownership. They don't want to give away all the responsibility. They want to be basically somehow independent from bigger companies. So they want some kind of autonomy. And I think if we only shift away to these rental practices, we basically just give back even more power to bigger companies who can control the whole product system. And I think the idea of the right to repair is really about giving back some power to the consumers themselves. I mean, like the option of going into these kind of rental contracts is still there, but this should not be the goal of this legislation, I think.
Thank you very much. A second theme that runs some of the question is the problem or the issue of price increase in case of a longer period of a guarantee period, first of all, but also with the right to repair. Of course, this is at some cost. And therefore, how to ensure that, for instance, the poor in the population will still have access to some of the basic products, and who has to bear the increase in price. I summarized two questions at least in that area. So maybe here, Patricia Gauthier, you want to react? Yes, please.
Yes, I'm happy to react. Indeed, the price could rise if we prolong the legal guarantee periods. But according to our members' research from for a couple of years ago, the French consumer organization OFC Que Choisir, the price increase was not that significant. And also taking into account that consumers are now seeing really the benefits of buying more durable products and the ones that would last longer. They can actually make a lot of savings. Our German member Vesselbever had a study on that, I think last year or 2 years ago, when they have proven how much consumers could save if they opt for more durable products only in 5 product categories, and would not have to then replace those products so often. On the other hand, if we're talking about the accessibility of products to those people that have maybe a smaller means, we also need to think about boosting the second-hand market, because this is also an element that could allow much easier access to certain types of goods. And at the moment, when consumers, especially when they buy, when we have consumer-to-consumer transactions, consumers are buying a product which has been used for 2 years, for instance, and that product is not covered by the guarantee anymore. So they don't have the right then to ask for a free repair of that product. On the other hand, if we would have longer legal guarantees of I don't know, for example, 7 years for a washing machine, then the consumers buying that product on the secondary market, they could still benefit from this protection for much longer, which would also incentivize them to buy more secondhand goods. So that's also a way how we see this could be approached. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose that this has also been a concern for the European Commission, and Dirk Staudenmayer, you want to say something?
Thank you. If I may, just one sentence on the rental debate. The trend toward an access economy is a fundamental trend of our economy, especially as regards digital products. That brings problems of its own, but we don't see it as the task of the legislator to promote this trend. This is a trend which is happening anyway, but should happen because the market forces, which is not only the producers and the sellers, but also the consumers, do it that way. And it should be left to the consumers whether they accept this or not, but it shouldn't be something which we push. But this is just a very short remark on that former point. On the question of the extension of the liability period, we looked at it from two angles. The first angle is to say, well, we just extend the liability period. That does not help the objective, because the objective is to achieve more sustainable consumption. And the underlying problem is that in the present system, the consumers choose, in practice, in the very, very large majority of cases, replacement instead of repair. If we extend for both rights on the first level of the sales directive, simply the liability period, they will continue to choose replacement instead of repair just for a longer period, which means more products, new products will be produced, more products will be thrown away during a longer period. That does not help the environment. So the other angle to what we looked at it was, are there tools, and the word incentivizing has been used, where we can incentivize consumers, for instance, by giving a longer guarantee period for repair, but only for repair, to choose repair instead of replacement. And we did behavioral experiments, and it turned out that despite that incentive, where it would be economically reasonable for a consumer to say, I chose repair, and for instance, in exchange, I get a third year of the liability period for the repaired good, they didn't do it. The majority of consumers still choose replacement and deprive themselves of the possibility of the longer guarantee period. So we had initially quite liked this incentivizing solution, the nudging effect from behavioral economics, but it didn't work out. It's not taken up by consumers. And then therefore, it doesn't make sense to do it. So just as a contribution to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So nudging should have an effect. So if it's not producing an effect, maybe that was not the right nudging component, if I may say so. And you said that you didn't want to be paternalistic, so that's why probably you decided to have other means to incentivize, which is, of course, incentivizing consumers is a way trying to be not paternalistic, but a soft paternalism, as some people have written. But I fully understand what you're saying here. Before giving the floor to Susanne, because I have a question to her as well in the chat, there was this question which is linked on spare parts, because if one speaks about repair, of course, you have the whole market of spare parts. And we know how much sometimes the market of spare part is inflated and the prices are inflated, because indeed people say, okay, if you want to get repair, that's one thing, but then you have to pay for it. And so of course, if the right to repair is free, the consumer will not pay directly for that, but indirectly, of course, the market of spare parts has to be addressed probably as well. And may I just ask, Dirk, whether you want to react on that question that came in, whether the Commission is taking into account this aspect in the more holistic approach, if I may.
Yes, but I mean, that's done in the ESPR proposal, because they are the whole purpose of, well, not the whole purpose, but one of important purpose of the ESPR proposal is to impose repairability requirements. The availability of spare part is an important module in that approach. So but that has to be done on the supply side. And therefore, it is done in the ESPR proposals and in the future implementing legislations, which will put this in practice. Thank you.
See. Thank you very much. You have, of course, availability and then price, but these are two aspects. Susanne Augenhofer wanted to react. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, but actually, Pascal, you already mentioned 2 points, which I also would like to make. The one is, Dirk, you said that you will focus on the information which will be given to consumers. And also, since I have been working on consumer law, the information-based approach is the one approach followed by the Commission in the area of consumer law. But I think it also has been shown that the information-based approach does not really work, that there's an information overload. And I think it would be crucial that the information is given to consumers at least in a way which makes it easy for them to comprehend with labels and so on what they're actually buying. Also, I'm still not really convinced, despite all the young people seeing on the street demonstrating for a greener environment, that at the end consumers are really willing, as you also have mentioned, to use the more to choose the greener choice when they are offered longer guarantees and they still choose replacement over repair. So like you, Pascal, I think also one maybe has to use the toolkit of behavioral economics and try to find the right incentives, and that information alone will not trigger the right choices. Or of course, we have to ask who is telling us what the right choice is. And with just 2 quick remarks, if I may. One, with regard to pricing, I also think it's not so much the longer guarantee, or this is one point, but as was said by others, I also think the spare parts and the repair itself, how pricey the repair itself is the key question, whether or not prices will increase. And if you want, I can answer the questions which were directed to me in the chat now or later, Pascal.
I fear later will not exist, so now would be better.
Okay, the question by Marco Loos was with regard to the EU CPD, because as I said, I'm not a fan of overregulation, and I have the feeling that there's a certain tendency for overregulation at the moment, not only with regard to the EU CPD, but also with regard to all the digital acts, and then it's not clear how they interline with each other. So yes, I think more amendments to the annex will not really help, because often the different commercial practices mentioned in the annex are not clear itself. I always mention number 28, which is the one referring to directly addressing children, and then it's not even clear who a child is under the UCPD. So Victor and Hans mentioned enforcement, and I think really enforcement is key for all the different legislative acts which are mentioned in the area we are talking about. So it's not, I think that we have not enough legislation on a European level with regard to consumer law. It's more with regard to enforcement, and maybe it's not surprising that neither in Germany nor Austria the Representative Actions Directive has been implemented in time. It was supposed until December 25, 2022, and it has not been yet imposed, and as far as I know, also in other member states. And then last point, the question with regard to direct actions against the producer. Victor also mentioned, and this was one of the questions in the chat, if there are other member states, yes. So in France, there's this Action Direct, and of course it has been discussed since the early 90s, but maybe now is a good time because there's some agreement that it will do some good for the environment and to achieve the green transition. And for the German-speaking audience, the scientific director of the ELI is going to talk about the Direktanspruch against the producer on Monday at 6:30 p.m. online. If you're interested, I will post the link. So thank you. I think those were all questions.
Susanne. Before giving the floor to Patricia, I would have a question for Victor Manet, because we understood in Dirk Staudenmayer's presentation that there were these two aspects of defect repair within and outside the protection period, the period of limitation. And during your presentation, Victor, you mentioned this, you said an obligation to repair beyond the legal guarantee period. So I was just wondering whether you truly meant an obligation to repair, but if it's beyond the guarantee period, it cannot be for free, I suppose, and therefore how to construct this so that it's an obligation, but what about the freedom to choose in a way when you are outside the protection? And maybe you can just answer this question.
Yeah, how I understand the impact assessment and the proposal from the Commission is that they're thinking about a direct claim against the seller or manufacturer outside of legal guarantee, which for free maybe, or at reasonable prices, which does not convince me in the end, because why should we focus only on the manufacturer or on the seller, and why should they be responsible to repair devices that were broken by the consumers themselves? So for me, it's important to shift away a little bit from that focus on the manufacturer and focus on the liberal spare part and repair markets on the secondary market. That's what I was trying to tell. And therefore, we have to look at the intellectual property laws, because there are design laws and patent laws that are hindering repairers to conduct repairs. And it's a lot of legal uncertainty for them conducting repairs.
Thank you very much for this clarification. At the same time, of course, if the product has been damaged by the consumer himself, this is no more a question of defect, because it did not exist at the time of transfer of possession. Now the question would then be, of course, who has the burden of proof, and that's sometimes even more tricky than everything else, and how to presume the existence, or for how long to presume the existence of a defect, even if we enlarge the period of guarantee. But thank you very much. I give the floor to Patricia Gauthier. She wanted to react.
Yes, I actually wanted to react to the point that was raised about the affordability of spare parts. I think that's a very interesting element of the right to repair. And it's not only covered by the ESPR that was mentioned, but also by the intellectual property laws, like Victor has highlighted as well. In this already quite complex landscape of different initiatives that have been mentioned today, there is also another proposal that was published in November, so the recast of the design directive. And the proposal now includes the repair clause, so an exception from the design protection for visible spare parts of complex products. But the trick here is that that clause would only apply to new designs. And for existing designs, the Commission has now proposed a transitional period of 10 years. And now this is also something we're looking into, because the question is, under the priority of reaching right to repair, can we wait so long for consumers to have access to repairable spare parts? I would say no, but this is also an interesting file that also, in my view, falls very well under the scope of this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk Staudenmayer, and then Hans Miklic.
I'm fine for Hans Miklic to come in first, please.
Okay, you want to have the last word? Okay. Okay, Hans, you have the floor. No, you're muted, sorry. You're still muted.
So this fits nicely in a way, because then, Dirk, you can answer to my question also. Yeah. So I think we all know, to be realistic, we all know about the limits of the information paradigm. Yeah, that's a long story. Yeah, I think my point is more, is there something going on in the Commission to initiate a deeper thinking of how to improve the communication that is forwarded via means of information? Yeah, so there's lots of research on how to word in a simple language, on using symbols, on having videos, on how to communicate. And I think, frankly, it frightens me, the idea that to the long list of information duties that Susanne stressed and Patricia mentioned, then okay, we have another list of information duties on sustainability. Yeah, and then there is one legally very important issue: no information duty, no information without a remedy, without a clear-cut remedy. That is the acid test of all information duties.
Thank you very much, and I would certainly subscribe to that. Dirk Staudenmayer, so you have the last word before my last word.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is obviously too much to say very briefly, but what really counts, and I'm certainly not going into the discussion about pre-contractual information as limits. I'm aware of it, yeah, and have been responsible for directives where it partially did go wrong and did go right in the legislative process. But let me stress one fundamental thing. What counts is the right policy mix. And the policy mix should provide the right incentives. And that's what we're aiming at. And we're trying at a policy mix, first of all, which I explained earlier, which is sort of the supply side and the demand side. The part of the demand side is providing some information requirements in the Empowering Green Consumers initiative, where we got it right or something will be to the legislator to judge. But in this proposal, we are also trying to have a policy mix, basically. And that policy mix will consist of some information. And here, it is interesting to listen to see what examples are good in the past legislation. And what one may pick on is, simple information tools which allow consumers to take informed choices when comparing the different offers which are on the market. Because let's not forget, and that has been mentioned, on the repair market, there will be producers, there will be the sellers, and there will be independent repair sector. And we do not want to foreclose one of those parts. Yeah. So that's basically, the consumer should be put in a situation for those defects which are outside the sphere of the sale of goods directive, to be able to compare the different offers on the central key factors which influence a consumer decision. And that's what we check. We check what are the parameters which consumers want to know before taking a repair decision outside the sale of goods directive scope, and then therefore give the consumer this key information and allow the consumer to compare between the different operators on the market. So it's on one hand an incentive to the consumer, and on the other hand a market-driven approach where the market players can compete both together. Well, we'll see where it works. but that's one important point. The obligation to repair, of course, we have listened very carefully to the contributions in the public consultation, and the for free variant was pretty much shut down in flames. And I understand why, basically, because it's simply too much asked to say the consumer can destroy something and then he goes to the producer and say, now please repair me, yeah, for free. Yeah, so I'm simplifying, I'm persiflaging here, but basically that doesn't make sense. Still, the producer is probably, that's also outcome of the consultation, the part of the player which at the end anyway repairs. So if there is an obligation to repair, it makes more sense to have it on the producer. But then we have to see that there's a clear link with the ESPR proposal. And therefore the ESPR proposal provides certain repairability and design requirements on the producer to make a high number of products repairable. And therefore a link with this will aim at the coherence in the holistic picture, which has been mentioned before. And then that should be coupled with a change of the sale of goods directive to deal also to increase in repair within the scope of the sale of goods directive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say that's the last word of the Commission for now, but obviously there's still a lot to come. It's time we get to the end of our lunch webinar. I want to say that it has been fascinating to see how we need to be holistic in these aspects, as was mentioned by several people, and that, of course, the right to repair brings in a lot of other big subjects, like also whether the well-informed consumer make really informed choices or not, and what about the consequences on the right to choose of people, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we will continue to have these type of discussions in the future. But what I have to say right now is to thank very warmly all our panelists for this very interesting debate and discussion around the right to repair. We are all thrilled to see what the Commission will produce in a couple of months. We have understood that this will come, and we will look at it, having in mind the discussion of today. So thank you to all the participants, the panelists, also to everyone who listened to this lunch webinar. I wish you a wonderful continuation in your days, and see you soon for the next webinar of the European Law Institute. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.